Welcome back, everyone, to our weekly discussion of the Haftara. And this week we're particularly lucky. We have another Haftara whose words are clear, whose connection to the parsha is obvious. And so what are we going to talk about? Leave that to me. We'll be fine. Let's start from the Haftara is in the second parak of Malachim Aleph, and begins with the pasuk Vayikrivu Yemei David Lamut Vayitzavet Shlomo B'no Lemor. Right, David Hamelekh is about to expire, and he's giving his last will and testament to his son Shlomo. It's no surprise that it serves for the Haftara of a parsha whose second pasuk is Vayikrivu Yemei Yisrael Lamut Vayikra Livno LiYosef Vayomar Lo, etc., etc. Right, they're exactly parallel. David calls Shlomo, Yaakov calls Yosef. But the truth is, that's kind of where the parallels fall apart. Because Yaakov has a specific request of Yosef. Al not tikbereni b'Mitzrayim, right? V'shachaftim avotai v'sasanim b'Mitzrayim u'kvaratim b'kvaratam, right? He wants to be buried in Marat HaMachpelah. On the other hand, David doesn't have an easy, direct, simple request of his son Shlomo. He has a whole ethical charge, plus a bunch of specific instructions. And so the connection between our parsha and Haftara has to be seen more broadly than just the first pasuk and the charge between Yaakov and Yosef and Yaakov and Shlomo. And the connection has to be, and it's accepted this way by Mefarshim and by Klal Yisrael, I think, the connection is between the Birkot Yaakov, which are sort of Yaakov's ethical charges, his last will and testament to his sons. That parallels David Hamelech's ethical charge, his last will and testament to his son. Yes, in one case there are 12 sons, in one case there are one son. It doesn't work exactly. And the truth is, it doesn't really work in substance, in the sense that Yaakov's brachot are subtle and lyrical and sometimes hard to parse. God gidud yigudanu v'hu yagud hakev. Who understands what that means, right? And David Hamelekh is pretty straightforward and simple to understand. But we're going to go with Klal Yisrael. We're going to paskin, generally speaking, that's the connection. That seems to be the connection. Everybody is happy with that. And even if we have minor quibbles, we'll accept that also. Having done that, let's turn to the Haftara, which is relatively short. It's 12 psukim. And the whole Haftara really fits into two separate parts. The first part, the first 4 psukim, are beautiful and meaningful and religious, and they sound like they were written as they were by the author of Tehillim. It really sounds like David Hamelekh at his best. Vayikrivu Yemei, right? Here's the psukim in Malachim Aleph Parak Bet. Vayikrivu Yemei David Lamut, Vayitzavet Shlomo B'no Lemor. Right, so he's about to pass away, and he commands Shlomo as follows: Anochi holech b'derech kol haaretz v'chazakta v'hayita leish. I'm going in the way of kol haaretz. I'm going to pass away. You need to grow up. You need to strengthen yourself. You need to be a man. According to the Seder Olam, Shlomo HaMelech is all of 12 years old at the time of the speech, so it makes complete sense that his father tells him, to grow up and to be a man. Pasuk Gimel. V'shamartat mishmares Hashem Elokecha lalechet b'drachav lishma chukotav mitzvotav u'mishpatav ve'edvotav. Right, David tells Shlomo, you need to be frum, you need to keep the Torah. Kakatuv v'tat Moshe leman taskil. Why do you do this? Leman taskil eid kol asher ta'aseh ve'eid kol asher tifneh sham. So you should understand, and David, Shlomo HaMelech is going to grow up to be the Chacham Mikol Adam, a little foreshadowing of that. So you should understand the Torah. Pasuk Daled. Leman yakim Hashem et dvaro asher diber alai lemor. But mostly, you need to be frum, you need to follow the Torah, you need to keep the halachos. Why? So that God will keep His word with me. Lemor. Im yishmeru vanecha et darkam lolechet lefanai be'emet b'chol levavam u'v'chol nafsham. If your children keep my covenant honestly and with all their hearts, lemor lo yikaret lecha ish me'al kisei Yisrael, then there'll be no breakage, right? There'll be no interruption in what God has promised me. What does God promise me? Right? Your kingdom, the Davidic dynasty, is going to be forever. And this raises the question, a fundamental question, which the truth is, you could ask about every one of God's promises to Am Yisrael. And that is it conditional or is it unconditional? Is the gift of Malchus Beis David, does it have to be, or is it contingent on the good behavior of David's children? Right? This is an interesting question that Rav Meidan raises with respect to our Haftara, and it's interesting for us as well. Personally, I've always understood every promise that God makes to us to be contingent. God promised us Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, but if we're going to be Obed Avodah Zarah, he'll be under no obligation to fulfill that promise. If we're going to be Mechalei Shabbos, God forbid, he'd be under no obligation to keep that promise. It's very much like in Sefer Bereshis, the Avos keep getting promised Eretz Yisrael. Why do they keep getting promised Eretz Yisrael? So Ramban thinks that the Avos were worried, Shema Yigrom Hachet. I could have done something in the interim which would free God from his promise. Yes, God promised Avraham Avinu Eretz Yisrael, but he promised it on the basis of our good behavior. If we keep the Torah, if we keep the mitzvahs, if we're ethical, if we're moral. Otherwise, God gets free. Okay? Now, it sounds in our Haftarah that Shlomo Hamelekh has to keep the Torah, so that God will have to keep his promise to Shlomo's father, right? That's also how it sounds in Divrei Hayamim, in Perek Chav Ches, in Divrei Hayamim Aleph. V'ato Shlomo b'ni, da et Elokei avicha v'avdeu b'leiv shalem u'v'nefesh chafetza, ki chol livavot doreish Hashem. God searches all hearts. V'chol yetze machshvot mevin, im tidrishenu yimatzei lach. If you search for God and you actively follow him, he'll favor you. And if you leave God, God will leave you. Right, so there you get the sense also. It's contingent. If Shlomo HaMelech is a good king, if his children are frum, if they keep the Torah, then God will keep his promise to David, and if not, not. On the other hand, we have in Tehillim Pei Tes the following. Says David HaMelech there, Matzasi David Avdi b'shemen kachim mishachtiv. I anointed David HaMelech with shemen. La'olam eshma lo chasti u'visi nemenet lo v'samti lo ad zaro v'chiso kimei shemaim. I'll establish this kingdom forever. Im ya'azvu banav torati u'v'mishpatai lo yelechun. If his children leave my ways, God forbid. Im chukotai yechalelu u'mitzvotai lo yishmoru. If they don't keep my Torah, ufakaditi b'shevet pisham u'v'negaim avonam. I'll punish them, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, v'chasti lo afir me'imo v'lo ashaker b'emunati. But I won't break my promise to David. I won't lie. Lo achalel briti u'motzos v'osai lo ashana. I won't change my plan. Achat nishpati b'kachi im l'David achazev. I promise you, I'm not going to disappoint David. Zaro lo lam yihiyeh v'chiso chashemesh negdi. His children will always rule. Ki yarech yikon olam v'eid b'shachak ne'man sela. So there we see the exact opposite. We see that God says to David, I'm going to keep my promise to you even if your children don't follow my ways. I'll punish them, but I'm going to keep them in control. So which is it? So it's an interesting philosophic conundrum. The Rambam seems to take a position. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, Perek Aleph Halacha Zayin says, Kevan shenimshach David zacha b'keter malchut. Right? Once David was anointed, he inherited the crown of kingship. Malchut lo uvarav hazicharim ad olam. They'll be his children or his sons forever. Sheneh ki sacha yenachon ad olam. V'lo zacha el liksherim. And he'll merit to have proper sons. Sheneh im yishvu banecha briti. V'af al pi shalo zacha el liksherim lo tichrot hamelucha mizar David leolam. he's never going to lose the melucha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu hivticho b'kach, shenemar, im ya'azvu banav torati u'mishpatai lo yelechun, ufakarti b'shevet pisham, u'vinagaim avonam v'chasti lo afir me'amal. Right? So the Rambam quotes what we quoted from Tehillim, and the Rambam kind of walks a fine line in between. The promise that God made to David is unconditional and it's forever. But the actual continuous fulfillment of the promise is dependent on behavior. So it could be there are other rulers, not from Beis David, who will rule from time to time, but ultimately the Malchus will go back to Beis David, right? Now, we saw this during the time of the Chashmonaim, who the Rambam doesn't seem so upset by, and maybe this is why. If the Beit David are not worthy of ruling, so Kohanim take over, so Levim take over, so whoever it is takes over. Says the Rambam, not too worked up about that. Ultimately, it will go back to Beit David. As we know, Shlomo Melech really was the last undivided ruler of Klal Yisrael. The Malchus was split, right? Yehuda and Binyamin stayed, and they kept Yerushalayim, and they were the continuation of Malchus Beis David. And the 10 tribes established their own kingdom, Malchut Beit Yisrael. Right? That's another answer to our question, which is God's promise to David Hamelekh will remain forever. It's not dependent on our behavior. But what does the Malchus mean? If it meant ruling over all the Jewish people, maybe not. But if it means having a king over some of the Jewish people, that will continue forever. Okay? Now, that's the first part I wanted to discuss, and that's an important point. But if the first part of the speech was written by the author of Sefer Tehillim, and we felt his religiosity, and we felt his love of God, as we did when we read those first 4 psukim, and it's moving, and it's beautiful, and it's full of religious meaning, the second half of the speech, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful, it sounds like something like Mario Puzo wrote, and put in the mouth of Don Vito Corleone, talking to his son Michael about the 5 families and killing them and taking revenge and all kinds of things that don't sound very much like David HaMelech. And it should bother us, right? It should bother us because it doesn't sound like him. Says the Haftara, next pasuk, V'gam ata yadata et asher asali Yoav ben Tzuria, asher asali shnei sarei tzivot Yisrael la'avner ben Ner v'la'amasa ben Yater v'yahagem v'yasem demei milchama b'shalom v'yitein demei milchama b'chagorato asher b'matnav u'mnalo asher b'mraglo v'asita kechachmatecha v'lo tereid seivato b'shalom sha'ol. More or less, David HaMelech is telling Shlomo to kill Yoav ben Tzuria, because Yoav ben Tzuria killed Avner and Amasa, what sounds like unnecessarily. Now, if you skip a pasuk in the Haftara, you find the next thing. V'nei imcha Shimi ben Gera ben Hayimini mi bachurim, v'u kilalani kilala nimratzat biyom lachti machanaim, v'hu yarad likrati hayardein, v'eshava lo bashem lemar imamitcha becharev. Right? The day that Shimi cursed David HaMelech was a terrible day, and David HaMelech swore he's not going to kill Shimi even though he cursed the king. Va'alta, now he says to his son, Al tinakehu ki ish chacham ata, v'yadata et asher ta'aselo, v'horadata sevato b'dam sha'ol. So what's going on? Is David HaMelech the religiously inspired person who tells us the first part of the speech? Or is he a bloodthirsty, petty, God forbid, Don Corleone type who's taking revenge in the second part of his speech? Okay? So, let's start at the very beginning. It doesn't sound like it was said by David HaMelech, and it doesn't sound particularly like it was said by HaKadosh Baruch Hu's most beloved person in Tanakh. And I really mean that. When you look at Tanakh, and maybe even including the Torah portion, it's hard to find anybody who God loves more than David Hamelekh. And God expresses that love over and over again, even when David Hamelekh sins. And let's admit to ourselves, David Hamelekh had a few really big whoppers. He did sin. So how could David have given us this part of the speech? So obviously, we're not the first people to notice this issue. And if you survey Mefarshim, as well as contemporary commentators, it's safe to say that the general approach to David's speech may be seen in its context. He's not just any king. He's the first in the chain of Malchut Beit David, which is supposed to be forever, as we said already, right? If he wants that Malchut to be moral, if he wants it to be good, if he wants it to be ethical, if he wants it to stand for Torah, right? It's really, really important at the beginning that he makes sure that that's the case, and that he charges his son that way, right? If there are any immoral acts that could taint the Malchus, they have to be fixed. And that's exactly what we find here. Okay, Yoav, the first person who David wants taken care of, was with David from the very, very beginning. He was the Sar Tzava of David, and he basically was with him through every war and every crisis of his kingship, including Mered Avshalom, when his own son challenged his leadership. It's true. The killing of Avner and Amasa were morally questionable. It is really true. And they may have been motivated personally. Certainly that's the sense that you get from what David tells us here. But does that wipe out all the good that he did in his life? The conquering of Yerushalayim, the establishing of Malchus Beis David. There may have been no other person in the world who was responsible for David's kingship more than Yoav. Now, this is a problem we encounter many, many times, and I've noticed it before. There are good people, maybe that's the wrong term. There are people who do good things who then for some reason do bad things. I think about it in terms of people who do sexually immoral things. They're predators, whatever. And people say to themselves, how could this have happened? How could we have let him get away? How did he get away with it for so long? The answer is because it's not that simple. He did a lot of really, really good things in his life, and people wanted to believe in him. That may be wrong, but it's a good character trait to want to see the good in other people. It really is. And it's dangerous to us, and it's dangerous to our society when people take advantage of that. But these people often do good things, and I didn't want it to be true that he's a sexual predator. I didn't, because that would take away from all the good things that he's done. I'm not talking about any specific case. I'm really not. The world is a complicated place, and we need to recognize that. So if Yoav acted immorally and was technically chayav misa, why didn't David kill him himself? So that's exactly the point I think I made before. The world is a complicated place. It could be that David personally owed Yoav for all the good that he'd done for him, and in David's calculations, he didn't have the moral right to kill Yoav. But his son did. His son has to stand for something better. His son has to make Malchus Beis David morally untainted. And if what Yoav did was morally questionable, we can't allow that to taint the Malchus Beis David. So he commanded Shlomo to do it. Not, as we may have thought originally, as a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it's a sign of strength. David recognized his limitations. He recognized what needs to be done, and he got his son Shlomo to do it as one of the first steps in his new melucha. Similar situation with Shimi ben Gera, who publicly cursed David Hamelekh when he was running away from Avshalom. It was a horrible scene, it really was, and definitely degrading to David Hamelekh. But if you're David Hamelekh at that time, when your son is rebelling against you, maybe you think from time to time, he's right. What this guy's saying to me is right. He's cursing me, and it should bother me, but I deserve it for some reason. Shimi was from Shevet Binyamin. Rabbi Meidan points this out. Ish Yehudi Haya, we say this pasuk out loud in the Megillah. Ish Yehudi Haya b'Shushan Abira, ushmo Mordechai ben Yair ben Shim'i ben Kish Ishimini. He was from Shevet Binyamin. Who else was from Shevet Binyamin? Shaul Hamelekh. Shimi took it personally. He thought David was a usurper of the throne. He was doing it without reason, without justification, and he was trying to wipe out Shaul's family forever, as other evil kings had done from time to time. And David maybe thought that, the world's a complicated place. Maybe David questioned his own motivation from time to time, especially in the down moment when he's running away from his own son who's rebelling against him, his own son. He may have felt that he deserved the insults. Okay, so he promises Shimei he's not going to take revenge on him. But the idea that the claim was true might taint the Malucha also. Right? David can't allow it to stand, because if it was true that he was doing it for his own personal aggrandizement, I'm sorry, I'm trying to say an English word that I can't remember. To aggrandize yourself, right? If you're doing it for his own pride, that would undermine the whole Malucha, and that couldn't be. So once again, he tells Shlomo, I can't take revenge on Shimi, and maybe I deserved it at the time. The world is a complicated place, but you have to do so. At the end of the day, this week's Haftara shows that David HaMelech at his greatest. Both the opening speech, which we recognize immediately to be straight out of Mesilat Yesharim, to be the most morally, ethically perfect speech ever, and even the second part of his speech, which is more nuanced morally, but it shows David HaMelech seeing the world for what it was. And he needs to establish a Malucha that's untainted by immorality and untainted by any personal motivations. And let's face it, the Navi endorses David's approach to the world with the last pasuk of our Haftara. Ushlomo yashav al kisei David aviv, vatikon malchuto me'od. Shabbat shalom, and see you next week.